Hey everyone, we're going to get started with lecture two, anaerobic adaptations that we see with anaerobic exercise, specifically resistance training. So learning objectives, this video will only cover principles of resistance training. We'll be back in class to do the other topics Wednesday and Friday, we hope. So first, I'm going to put all these terms up here, these definitions. We need to differentiate between these different types. Resistance training is what this course is based on. You see that it's just exercise prescription to increase a certain outcome, muscular strength, endurance, power, hypertrophy, whereas the other three are sports specifically that um, will produce some sort of outcome, such as being able to do a 1RM on a given lift, or change your musculature to achieve a certain look. So with powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, and bodybuilding, those are not what we're talking about when we're just talking about basic resistance training exercises. But we may mention those sports throughout this class. So this course, this lecture is going to start with benefits of anaerobic exercise and then move towards all the different adaptations. So when we look at benefits, we know that exercise in general, and then getting into specifically resistance training, has a lot of effects on the body, neuromuscular, skeletal, so anatomical, physiological changes, and then also performance outcomes relating to a sport. All these changes will benefit every single population. Finley, no. Benefits all our populations. Finley, no. Come here. When I say all populations, I mean your average adult, your everyday person. I mean children. I mean older adults. I mean clinical populations. Obviously, athletes. There is so many benefits for every single population of people. So we know that if you are deconditioned, just starting a resistance training program will affect aerobic capacity. It may increase your VO2 max by, a few variables if you're deconditioned. If you already have high aerobic capacity, it can help to maintain aerobic capacity as well. Body composition, we know we can see decreased body fat percentage, improved muscle mass with training. Sport performance, everything from jump height to swing speed, to kicking force or kicking speed, to any other like sprinting, any other sport outcome. Think of all those different characteristics in sports. Resistance training can help to improve that. And then just functional capacity. That's why it's beneficial for all populations, because it allows you to maintain your bone mineral density or prevent a decline in bone mineral density. It helps to maintain muscle mass, prevent that atrophy with age. It helps with flexibility. It helps to reduce any like arterial stiffness in arteries, which can help with like vitals, like blood pressure. It can help to reduce your submaximal heart rate. Or resting heart rate. So there's so many different outcomes that we get from resistance training. And my point of this slide is it's for every single population, doesn't matter who you are, and for any outcome you're trying to achieve. All right, so this lecture today, like I said, it's mainly just principles of resistance training. So when the purpose of understanding these principles is anytime we design a program, we start thinking about we want to create a resistance training program for ourselves or for someone else, an athlete, a person. These principles should be applied because the application of these principles creates successful programs. Overload. We have to overload the body for it to adapt because we are biological systems. And when you expose a biological system to a stimulus, eventually we will become immune to that stimulus. We'll stop responding. And so that's why we have to increase the stimulus, the load, the repetitions, the decreased rest, whatever it is. We call this progressive overload. We do it continually over time, very small amounts. The stress that we place on our body has to increase in order for us to be able to adapt, see change, produce more force later on. So we look over here. Pretty realistic outcome is we have a load, we adapt to that load. Well, we have to climb this hurdle. Every time we change something like increase that load, we have to overcome whatever obstacle that we kind of face in that new scenario. But I like the second one on this side where our fitness is increasing steadily, but we're going to see drops in our fitness because every time we increase that load, what happens? We're going to be sore, we're going to be fatigued, we're going to be tired, we're going to produce a change, we're going to produce some sort of outcome. And that outcome may drop our fitness initially, but then we'll adapt and we'll get better. We'll recover and get better. And then that adaptation will start to steadily rise, will increase. This is probably the most important one, progressive overload. We will talk about different types of loads that help to achieve this. So first, we have a retaining load or a maintenance load. This is a constant training load over time. So let me describe this graph because I'm going to talk about this graph on 3 pages. So we see on the y-axis physical fitness, okay, so how fit we are. The x-axis is the training load. And then we have athletes and beginners. So with our beginners, we have lower fitness. So you see it exists on that lower fitness level at the bottom. And then the athletes exist in that higher fitness. That black box. So what that black box means is the neutral zone. That's our neutral zone. That's like where we are because you can see that it occurs in that retaining load for both types of people. Neutral zone of training. So when we use a retaining or a maintenance load, fitness remains the same. We can use a retaining or a maintenance load for a while without seeing a drop in our fitness, but eventually we will, and we'll talk about that. But this is our retaining, our maintenance load. We can use this for a while to just keep where we are. Next is stimulating. This is a load greater than what we're accustomed to. So it's something heavier, harder, more intense to what my body experiences on a daily training basis. So this allows for positive adaptations. The stimulating load is what gets us to the higher level of training. You can see for athletes and for beginners, it is on the opposite or the above side of that neutral zone. So the training load's higher, and over time, it will produce more fitness. Then there's a detraining load. Look on the lower side of the neutral zone. This is something that this is something that is lower than what we're accustomed to. This is an easy workout. This is something that we may use on like a rest day. We may use if we're like in a deloading phase, a recovery phase. But using a detraining load over time does lead to decrements. So if we use a load lower than what our body's actually accustomed, we will lose fitness. But there's always a time and a place for a detraining load, and they are useful just in small doses. And we'll talk more about that one later too. Okay, second is accommodation. So with accommodation, this is employing that same exercise over and over and over again. What type of load gets us to accommodation? It's that retaining, that maintenance load. So same exercises. I'm gonna do back squat, deadlift, bench press, shoulder press, and that's all I'm gonna do. And I'm gonna use the same load and the same rep scheme. You'd think that you'd maintain your fitness with that, and you can. But like I mentioned, we are biological systems, and biological systems who are exposed to a stimulus over time become used to it, and we stop adapting. We stop responding to that same stimulus. We call this the theory of diminishing. Guys, Finley, stop. Finley, theory of diminishing return. Come here, Finn, come here. Theory of diminishing return. Performance diminishes over time when using this constant load. This leads to that accommodation. So how do we avoid accommodation? Normally, I would have y'all think of what are some quantitative changes that we can make to our training programs, and then what are some qualitative changes that we can make to our programs in order to avoid accommodation and not experience this theory of diminishing return. So quantitative, we know that means numbers. With quantitative, the first most obvious is increase the load. And that's great. It works really well for beginners and intermediate lifters to just increase that load. Okay, it's great. You can also think about like rep schemes, just changing up anything with like numbers and time when you think quantitative. Qualitative changes, would be changing up the exercises or the technicality of the lift, making the lifts more complex. And we'll talk about how we can change hand position, foot position, how we can slow down like the tempo, the speed, the position of our body. And then just changing the exercises in general, just making those more complex. So from like front squat to hang clean to power clean to clean and jerk to snatch, just increasing the skill set of the lift. Qualitative changes plus quantitative is how our advanced lifters get better, how they avoid accommodation. And so we have to make both quantitative and qualitative changes when looking at more highly trained athletes. Next principle is specificity. Specificity, also referred to as the SAID principle, which is specific adaptations to imposed demands. And so what this is basically how we train is how we adapt. Muscles adapt based on the stress that we place on them. So if we do a certain type of training over and over and over again, that's exactly how our body's going to adapt. For example, if I sprint and I do a lot of sprint training, so I'm going to do quarter mile sprints, I'm going to do half mile sprints, I'm going to do 100-meter sprints. I'm just going to sprint and sprint and sprint. I'm going to get really good at sprinting, but those are going to be anaerobic adaptations that will not translate to long distance performance. That will not really make me a better half marathon runner if I just do these sprints. Yeah, it may help me like finish my race, but it will not help me with the like aerobic capacity that I would need to do that. Basically, if you train a certain way, that's exactly how your body's going to adapt. There will be some carryover or transfer. Like if I do all these sprints, yeah, that may improve like my jump height performance. It may improve anything that has to do with anaerobic. So you can kind of put anaerobic adaptations in like the same category as if I train anaerobically, yeah, I may see changes in other anaerobic workouts or anaerobic outcomes. There's not a lot of carryover from aerobic to anaerobic, vice versa. And so that said principle is really sport specific, I'll say as well, like if you're actually training for some sort of sport or event. So we cater this towards athletes. We want to make sure that they're training in conditions that replicate their sport. What are they doing in their game, in their event? Are they using the same muscles? Are they doing the same movements? What about the same energy systems? And so that's how we want to train our athletes. We obviously want to reproduce those same exact conditions based on this specificity principle. Next is reversibility. Adaptations can be lost just as quickly as we gained them. But this is just the most basic statement because it really depends on so much. It depends on the history, like the athlete's training history, depends on the athlete's genetics. It depends on if we're looking at hypertrophy versus neural adaptations versus aerobic adaptations. They're all different. And so we reverse differently. In our adaptations lecture, I mean, this is our adaptations lecture. In the end of this lecture, we will get into a little bit more detail. With reversibility, I will say that there's this term, this use it or lose it, right? With use it or lose it, it's that if we're not constantly, and maybe not constantly, but if we are not stimulating the body, stimulating the muscles, stimulating the energy systems at a consistent basis, then those training adaptations will diminish. We'll lose them. So basically, once we gain something, we have to keep using it so we can maintain it and it won't stop, it won't drop back down. So with our use it or lose it principle, there's another one. It's called soon ripe, soon rotten. And that one means that a lifter who is new to lifting, new to exercise, who just started working out, who just started training, and they see these adaptations happen, and they've been training for 3 to 6 months, but then they stop training for 3 to 6 months, they're going to lose a lot of what they gained in 3 to 6 months. But if we have an athlete who's been training for 3 to 6 years, they can't take 3 to 6 years off. But if they take a few weeks, a few months off, they will not see dramatic losses because of how much fitness they had gained in those years. And so training history matters, genetics matter. And then aerobic adaptations, we actually lose aerobic fitness like VO2 max and all the cellular muscular changes with like from aerobic exercise, we lose that faster than we do anaerobic adaptations like resistance training, hypertrophy, and neural adaptations, which we'll spend some more time later on that one. Individuality. Every single person adapts differently, even if you have the same exact workout. So if I put every single one of my students on male, and then we have to do separate males and females because of sex differences, which we'll talk about in our next lecture. Um, all the males on the same workout, all the females on the exact same training program. You will all adapt differently. You will see strength gains, power outcomes, hypertrophy changes at a different rate. I would normally ask you why. Why do we see this? People would say like genetics, yes. Other people would say dietary factors, yes. Training history, yes. So those are the three big ones. That's why we all adapt differently, and you can never compare your progress to somebody else's. Don't ever do that. Because it's not fair. There's no comparison because you are just one body and there's no single body like yours. And so that's why you really can't compare your progress to anybody else's. Variation, I think is our last one. We always have to add variety. And we'll spend some time, kind of several lectures down the road, talking about adding variety, variation in our training programs. What this does is it further helps to promote adaptations as well as reduce boredom and overtraining possibilities. And so with the variety, we want to make sure the program is varied, but not overly varied. So there is kind of a fine line with that. Because if it's too monotonous, that leads to boredom and stagnation in progress. And then if it's overly varied, that can also lead to overtraining because you're forcing the body to try to adapt to too many stimuli, which can kind of lead to that burnout, that stripping of the nervous system, the central nervous system. And so we do want to add some sort of change in routine. That could be anything from changing the exercises to changing the sets and the reps, changing the tempo of the lifts, order of exercises. There's lots of different ways to add variety, and we'll get into some more examples about that later. Last topic is looking at this window of adaptation. So with this window, and the window is above the red line, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as we train a specific variable. So as we're working on like sprint speed or muscle hypertrophy or maximal lower body strength, we are making these improvements, but the potential to get better and better gets smaller and smaller the greater training age we have. So the more time we spend training this variable, we get better, right? And our performance gains increase. But look over here as that genetic potential, that genetic ceiling is so close to where my potential is. There's not a lot of room for growth. So, question I have about this is who experiences this? So, not the everyday lifter, not the everyday person will experience this, but certain subsets of the population will. And then how can we bust past that? How can we get past our not the genetic potential, but how can we kind of keep seeing improvements before we hit our genetic ceiling? And so first is most common people who experience this are like bodybuilders competing in competitions. Like they realize like they can't get any bigger. Their muscles will not grow anymore. And for one, that's due to a like maximal upper limit on cell size. Like all of our cells are like pre-programmed to have this maximal cell size. And that's just based off our genetics. And an only way to get past that is using some sort of substance, a performance enhancing substance like anabolic steroids in order to break past that barrier of cell size. And then we also see this in Olympic athletes. So with Olympic athletes, we like sprinters like Usain Bolt, who he won in like London 2012 and Rio 16, but he couldn't break his own records. And so he set these records so high and he still won every single race. But you hit a point where like you can't get any faster. So genetically, he hit his peak. We can see this in strength athletes sometimes who hit their maximal strength and they still like win out, but they can't add just like those last few pounds to lift heavier. And so we see this a lot in these elite athletes. But how can we get past that? So maybe not our bodybuilders and our Usain Bolts and our Olympians, but maybe the everyday person. Like when we feel like we're stagnating and we feel like we're about to hit this high, hit our potential, like what can we do? Normally I'd have y'all share and tell me what you think. Um, one really good answer, I have a lot, is just adding that variety, but making sure that variety is varied in the sense to where it's really something that you normally wouldn't think of or do on an everyday basis, something that's completely outside of your training window, your training zone and adding that maybe like every few weeks to your programs. And that can kind of shock the body into like, oh, wow, I have not used these muscles. I have not activated these muscle fibers. This was a completely different workout that kind of restarted some new adaptations. And so I've gotten that answer a lot. And then other is like just like that mix, like kind of like the variety, like mixing it up. Maybe adding, like if you're not a runner, adding some running to your workouts. If you don't do plyometrics, adding plyometrics to your workouts. So adding something that you don't normally do is another way to stimulate some sort of change in your body. Like I said, you can just do it every once in a while. And so yeah, kind of cool discussion to talk about. So you have a quiz that will be due at the end of the week. Here is your review for quiz one. Quiz one is over lecture one and two, but only from here on up. Okay. So if you want to screenshot this, take a picture of this, save this, this will be your study guide for your quiz, which I'll send out an email later if I'm not able to talk about it in class. Okay. Well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it and hope you have been safe and warm on these snow days. And I will see you back in class very soon. Okay.